Hey, what's up everybody, it's your boy, Prof. Trough, and today we're gonna be reacting to a TierZoo video. Oh, excuse me. Were Pterosaurs OP? I'm not sure which one were Pterosaurs. Like, I know a decent bit about dinosaurs, mostly because I played like a zoo dinosaur game when I was a kid. And I spent a lot of time on that fucking game, so I learned a decent amount about dinosaurs. But I'm not sure by name which is which. Oh, so that's the one with the huge beak. Yeah, they're OP as fuck. But let's see how OP. That is the question, how OP. Is that what people mean when they say bird brain or?
Flight is an ability which has been unlocked by a grand total of 4 separate factions in the history of the game. However, only one of these factions is no longer playable in today's version of Outside. I'm of course talking about Pterosaurs. Pterosaurs still hold the record for the largest, most powerful flying builds in the history of the game.
Jesus,
so
look
why
at
is it
that.
that the Pterosaur build is absent from the current meta? Did they simply fall out of favor with the player base as players gravitated toward the newly added bird builds? Or were they outright banned by the devs? Well, first, let's discuss the Pterosaur build's introduction to the game. So, directly following the biggest mass ban of all time, the update that came at the end of the Permian expansion, the Archosaur faction gained access to 2 new classes. The one that garnered most of the attention was the Dinosaur class, and for good reason. Dinosaurs ended up becoming one of the most over-sexualizing, meta-defining builds of all time. However, the other new class was the Pterosaur, which, despite having a less dominant role in the Mesozoic meta, was honestly an even more shocking addition to the game. Prior to the Pterosaur's debut, flight was an ability restricted exclusively to the insect faction. No vertebrate had been able to make a flying build work yet, and because of that, insects had gotten away with some questionable strategies, and hadn't changed much about their flagship builds in a long time. Pterosaurs were in the perfect position to punish the insect player base for their complacency.
Okay.
And on top of having a great matchup against insects, being able to fly gave them a reliable escape option during a meta where being able to escape meant the difference between reaching the endgame or getting one hit by extremely overpowered jaws. Now, while it is true that eventually Pterosaurs started investing a lot into the power stat too, when they were first added to the game, they were all far from gigantic. Initially, their base stats looked something like this. Nowhere near the power and size of their later builds, instead keeping the vast majority of their base stats allocated to mobility. Despite having an HP stat about as high as a piece of paper, this strategy worked great. There were no serious aerial threats they needed to avoid, as the Griffinflies had been banned a few updates prior, and the birds of prey wouldn't come out for a long time.
What the fuck is a Griffinfly?
Griffinflies had been banned.
Bro, can you imagine if that shit existed today? I ain't going outside, bro. I mean, I already don't go outside that often, so.
This meant Pterosaurs were in the perfect position to diversify and test out all kinds of wacky strategies. In addition to chasing down flying insect players, Pterosaur remains also found that this small, agile playstyle also functioned great in the role of support class, cleansing the giant dinosaur players of parasites. Players looking for better XP rates could also opt for a fish-eating build, although with higher reward, of course, comes higher risk. To mitigate this risk, Pterosaur mains eventually started to actually put some of their points into HP and power. Normally this is a bit of a gamble since larger size tends to reduce mobility. And while it did
require more XP for level ups, right?
They more than made up for this by gaining access to the Soar ability, allowing them to fly for extremely long distances without using all that much stamina. Upon gaining this ability, some Pterosaur players realized that a new playstyle had become available to them, the Scavenger. See, when the cost of traveling long distances becomes lower, it actually becomes a viable strategy to search for rare but extremely high value loot drops. Like, for example, the remains of a defeated sauropod player. It might seem risky to bank on being able to find that level of loot consistently, but it's a lot less risky than the alternatives, and when you can patrol an entire server, even the rarest loot isn't that hard to find. Plus, them spending most of their time flying,
Dark Souls, a silver dash and crumbs.
Them spending most of their time flying minimize the time spent close to danger.
Oof.
It's a good thing Pterosaurs were able to spec into gigantism, because things were about to get a bit tougher for the smaller Pterosaur mains. Their command over the skies was being challenged, as some of the dinosaurs had unlocked flight. Through an entirely different combination of perks
Oh
and
yeah, these
attributes,
things.
a new faction of the dinosaur player base had discovered a way to use an ability originally intended only to provide cold resistance in order to fly. This was bad news for the pterosaur mains who liked the smaller, more agile playstyle, as these new avian dinosaurs were far better optimized for that niche, particularly in forest biomes. Their feathers were far less vulnerable to damage than the thin membranes that pterosaurs were using to fly, meaning that these new avian dinosaurs didn't have to worry about puncturing a wing when flying through a dense forest or jungle. Feathers also offer some blunt damage resistance, making any mid-air collisions less damaging. These avians were sorely lacking in size and power though, and so it was on that front that these pterosaurs opted to compete with them. Soon the larger scavenger/opportunist type build became the pterosaurs' only viable strategy, as the avian player base had control over the agile insectivorous niche. This might not seem like that bad a trade, ceding control of a rather fragile playstyle to another faction, while keeping control of a record-breaking niche never before seen in-game, and for a while this was absolutely true. The pterosaur player base continued to thrive, scoring easy loot while still remaining out of reach of the overpowered giant dinosaurs. Unfortunately, those overpowered dinosaurs did end up inadvertently causing the downfall of the pterosaurs, because after an incredibly long run of dominating the meta, eventually the devs finally dropped the ban hammer, and this is where the pterosaurs' size came back to haunt them. The banning of the dinosaurs meant that those high-quality loot drops suddenly went from rare to non-existent, and with no way to keep up their huge food cost, giant pterosaurs became unviable. Meanwhile, the small builds like birds and mammals, which had been oppressed for so long by the giants they had to contend with, suddenly had free reign over huge territories. In particular, the bird's feather ability had its initial purpose suddenly become extremely relevant again, as the overworld temperature had cooled significantly due to the sun being blocked out by dust. Experimenting with new combinations of abilities is key to creating an innovative build that breaks the meta and gives rise to new dominance. And while the pterosaurs initially made some incredible strides in revamping the reptile class to exploit an open niche, in the end it was the birds whose adaptations won out, usurping an already established competitor and gaining air superiority that is yet to be challenged even in the current meta. Experimentation is also important to another build, the YouTube creator. The YouTube meta isn't always conducive to established creators.
Okay. Yeah, I learned a shit ton. Okay, I guess I don't know that much about dinosaurs. I didn't know shit about this vid. I'm gonna be honest with you, I did not know shit. I was expecting him to talk about how a little bit more about how they after they became bigger, a little bit more about that. He didn't really mention much besides that they got big and started eating shit. I mean, I guess that's how it goes though. Anyway, that was Pterosaurs, whatever. OP. I guess the answer is yes, because they were dominating the one niche, one meta, whatever. So I guess they were OP, and then they got fucking meteored. Shit, feels bad, man. Anyway, see you next time, everybody. It's your boy Prof Chav.